Today I'm talking about an album that has a track that I consider its best track that starts like this. Details coming up. Hey, I'm Michael Douglas. Welcome to Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And on this edition of the show, it's another album review, and it's one of my all-time favorite albums that I really don't talk about a lot because, it's not one of these hard-charging rock albums or heavy party R&B albums or even power pop albums. It's an album that's chock full of, mid-tempo and balladry, and an album that, for this artist, came after a very successful album, but is kind of a mixed bag in terms of where this artist ultimately went. I'm talking about the album Get Closer, the 1982 album by Linda Ronstadt. It's an album that came out toward the end of the year, and it's probably most famous for the title cut, which has been used in this particular commercial. Remember that? But there's also more to this album than that song. This would be Linda Ronstadt's final mainstream pop album that she would make for about 7 or 8 years. And it came hot off the heels of her enormously successful Mad Love album from 1980. So at a time when most things mattered in popular music, the album Get Closer is very much of and out of its time. Linda Ronstadt, the pop rock queen of the 1970s, was coming off throwing quite a curveball, starring in a revival of Gilbert and Sullivan's The Pirates of Penzance on Broadway, remember that? And earning a Tony Award nomination for that. And as she said in an interview a couple of years after that, what she really wanted to do after that production and the Get Closer album was an album of jazz and standards. And it didn't quite come together until 1986 when she released What's New, an enormously successful career detraction for Linda Ronstadt with Nelson Riddle, and it hit number 3 on the album charts, again spawning 2 other similarly themed albums in the late 1980s. And Ronstadt said that when she was busy doing the sessions for Get Closer, she wanted an album that was a little more mellow than the predecessor of the album, Mad Love from 1980. But she couldn't stop thinking of, what's new in those albums coming later in the decade. But let's focus on Get Closer. And where 1980s Mad Love leaned into the sounds of the day, power pop, new wave, pop, Get Closer returns the artist to her 70s roots. And it really does show on some of the tracks on this album. Get Closer is firmly in Ronstadt's pop chart hit-making pocket, though a tough guitar riffed song and definitely a song for its moment. I think it should have been a top 10 hit. It certainly didn't get that high on the charts. But people, if you did play that song, especially Gen Xers, people of my generation, probably do remember hearing it. But that's about the only song to which that description applies on the album Get Closer. It was one thing in the 1970s, but to be covering the likes of the Exciters' Tell Him and Ike and Tina Turner's I Think It's Gonna Work Out Fine on an ostensibly pop album from 1982 was perhaps a bit of a head scratcher. And it was, again, it's a mixed bag. We're not sure where Linda's head was at when she was including a lot of these standards along with a pure pop presence in the early 1980s. Somehow, her take on Billy Joe Royal's 1965 hit, I Knew You When, which was the album's second single and the album's best track, and the song that begins like this. In many ways, that was, I think, the more successful single of the album, I Knew You When, because it doesn't sound as dissonant as some of the other remade tracks on the album. It was very much of a piece with many of her classic 70s covers, and it was very well welcomed on Get Closer. There's also a couple of great country tracks on this album as well, Sometimes You Just Can't Win, and My Blue Tears, the 1977 recording made with a vocal assist from the great J.D. Souther, a guy who's also worked with James Taylor, climbed to number 20 on the country singles chart in '83, while Tears, a Dolly Parton song originally on her 1973 classic album, Coat of Many Colors, was recorded during the original sessions for what would become Ronstadt's inclusion on the Trio project. That's the project she had with Dolly Parton and Emmylou Harris, and it sounds fantastic. Again, this album just, I think, jump-started Linda Ronstadt's desire to go off into those kind of tangents with What's New and the Jazz Standards album and the Trio albums, which, again, were enormously successful in the late 80s and early 90s. There are two other good tracks on the album. There's the song Talk to Me of Mendocino, which Ronstadt gives an artful, precise reading with accordion, believe it or not. And the accordion was played by Lindsey Buckingham. And there's Jimmy Webb's Easy for You to Say, which only hit number 54, but became a surprise number 7 hit on the AC charts. And this, of course, is Linda Ronstadt's version from the LP Get Closer. It's a great breakup song, but not angst-ridden, and maybe that's the magic of it. Ronstadt's vocal on those two tracks is strong but mannered, and it's a great performance of a brilliant song, expertly produced and sung, and the whole package is fantastic on that particular cut. And if you're listening to that song, the last couple of verses are just incredible. You know, Get Closer is ultimately a crazy quilt patchwork cross-section of Ronstadt's entire career that she tries, I think, to tie up in that album. I think she does a pretty good job, considering, I suppose. Maybe it should have been a double album with twice as many tracks. So generally, I do recommend this album, and I think it's enough for people to listen as part of her oeuvre. It's not an essential album in her canon, but one that I think deserves to be listened to, because at that point in her career, I think she was still trying to decide where to go and to take her passions outside of the pop rock world. And if you think of Get Closer as a gateway, then I think it did fulfill its mission. And ultimately, I mean, we're talking about Linda Ronstadt back then. She really never sounds bad when she's singing. And of course, she is not able to sing anymore because of the Parkinson diagnosis. But thankfully for us, she has a very rich catalog. And Get Closer, while not essential, I think holds a place in her catalog. So that's my album review of Get Closer by Linda Ronstadt. I'm Michael Douglas. And if you like what you see here on Dr. Pundit, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm. It helps get this show out to people who like this kind of channel on YouTube. And it allows me to continue giving you more of this great content. As the late great Barry White always used to say, let the music play. And I'll see you on the next episode.